Yes, TNT Radio, today's news talk, and I'm very happy to be joined for the first time today, unlocked and loaded by the one and only Sarah Wilkinson. Sarah is a human rights campaigner, and in her own words, on her Twitter feed or X feed, she was a graphic designer, and now she is working for freedom and justice in Palestine, and she wants an end to the illegal Israeli occupation of Palestine. Sarah, welcome to TNT this morning, and I want to believe you're having a good Friday so far. Could all go horribly wrong now that you're on air with me, but so far, have you had a good day?
It's very difficult. We were talking about secondary PTSD from this Israeli genocide, and actually, it's very difficult to have a good day. Every morning we wake up to dreadful news, and so it's sometimes it's quite hard to go to sleep. So it's very hard to have a good day at the moment, and I think that there's millions of people feeling that way across the globe at the moment.
Yeah, in fact, just before you came on, I was commenting to Gemma, who we do the news editorial together. When we talk about the stories that we're talking about, or when I talk about the stories I'm about to talk with you about right now, about what's happening in Rafah, what's happening in Gaza, it puts a lot of perspective on our own lives, just how blessed that we are, and that we're not being bombed, that we're not being starved. And sometimes it's easy as news passes into, today's news becomes obsolete sometimes next week. But the people that are victims and the people that are suffering, it doesn't go away for them. It remains for them. So therefore, there's certain items that we certainly need to be highlighting and bringing people's attention to. One of which in particular, if I can just kick off with you, there's a famine at the minute going on in Gaza. This is now being reported widely. Even The Guardian have picked up on this one here in the UK. They ran a piece yesterday, and I'll just tell you what the headlines are. The Gaza famine is human-made, and the US is complicit in this catastrophe. So this is coming from The Guardian. Okay, they're not pulling any punches with their headline here. Experts first warned of rising hunger back in December, yet when Israel blocked a vital US food shipment, Biden did nothing. So this is not being suppressed, or this, rightly so, this story is not being suppressed, and they're saying that this particular catastrophe is man-made. Is that seeping into the public consciousness yet, do you think, or does it still have a way to go before people grasp what's really happening?
Actually, I think it has a way to go. Yes, look, this is Israeli designed, it's Israeli engineered, and we were warning about famine months ago, months before really it began, because it was the obvious next step. Like when you commit a genocide, what happens in the second stage of that genocide, once you've destroyed the hospital infrastructure and you've assassinated surgeons and medical students, even nurses, doctors, you've deleted and there's no anesthetic, basically there's no medicines, there's no infrastructure. So when you do that, so that wounded Palestinians, infected Palestinians cannot get treatment, then the next stage that you're looking at is disease, which goes along with famine and disease as a pair are literally just another stage of genocide. So this has been engineered. It's been engineered very, very carefully, so that by the time that the Palestinians get to the stage of famine, the roads, the infrastructure, the ability to get aid on the ground to the Palestinian people in, for example, the northern regions, which has been our big, sticking point, becomes impossible. But not only that, the Israelis have actually assassinated, I think it's 6 or 7 of the Palestinians who were keeping a semblance of control, if you like, a semblance of normality and of law and order, especially in the north. And they were getting aid distributed when it came in to prevent the black market getting out of control. They were distributing aid to those that needed it most, or doing their best to distribute it when they could. Now, those people have been assassinated, and assassinated recently. Also, there was a warehouse that UNRWA started to put together to be able to stockpile elements of humanitarian aid when it started to come in, which was the idea of the port that they were building. And then that was bombed on the same night that the Israelis were making statements about this and the Americans about this brand new port. So nothing has ever made sense. And so, yes, of course, it's engineered, but it's engineered very cleverly. And so what's been stripped bare is the ability to get food to people, which then made us go all the way to Jordan and set up the Airdrop Aid for Gaza campaign, because we knew that the only way to get food into the north, the real northern regions of Gaza, which has been separated and divided by a tank belt or a new Israeli road, and is impossible to cross. So the only way we could get aid in was by airdrop. And that is still ongoing, and we do still need support with the airdrops, despite that there have been some errors along the way. And now we see that the footage outside Rafah, the footage of the lorries, the trucks that we were never allowed to film, that is becoming more commonplace. There's more and more. I think it was the UNICEF chief. He was denied access into Gaza, and it kind of backfired on the Israelis, because he took his camera out and walked along the road and started photographing all of the trucks that are being held up in Rafah and are not being given access into Gaza. And those that are given access have their loads removed, sabotaged, many of the life-saving items taken out because they're under the banned list. So even when a lorry gets in, it's only getting in a minimal way. So we can see all these things, and yet the public hasn't quite woken up to the fact that maybe because they're not looking thin enough yet, they're using sort of ridiculous excuses of, well, they don't look like, I think they've taken images of famine from years of other war-torn areas, and they're using this to gauge what famine should look like. And it doesn't look enough like famine for people to rise up. The outcry is not big enough.
That's a good point, because normally when you think about images of famine, people cast their mind back to the Ethiopian famines that happened. Live Aid sprang up off the back of it, and you have these death camps in Darfur and Sudan where people are naked and there's flies everywhere, and the people are literally just like walking skeletons. And I think maybe that's a good point that you make. Maybe people aren't seeing enough horror, or it's not horrific enough in their eyes to react to it. But of course, it's horrific for the people that are suffering at the minute. And actually used the word there, it's carefully constructed, this at the minute. Let me add a word in there. It's wickedly constructed, because on top of the fact that you made the point as well, that when famine and disease go hand in hand, and I've been in areas and I've seen famine areas in sub-Saharan Africa, and when your body's that emaciated and your body's that weak and your immune system is so suppressed, then when disease comes, and disease does come, it runs rampant throughout an already emaciated and destroyed population, and the death toll is magnified exponentially. So constructed carefully, and I dare say constructed wickedly as well, for the reasons that you've also pointed out. Okay, sir, we're talking about much aided relief that does need to get through into certain parts of Gaza and Rafah. We talked about an article that was published in The Guardian there saying, this is engineered by Israel predominantly, aided and abetted by the Biden administration. There's another article that I saw yesterday, this is being reported in Sky News, just because it's being reported in the mainstream in the way that it is. UK aid for Gaza has been stuck at the border for weeks, as David Cameron comes out and blames Israel for the delays. So I think there's a narrative change happening here at the minute. It's hard to defend the indefensible at the minute, and you're seeing a lot of backtracking in the rhetoric of some politicians. So Israel being blamed by David Cameron. The UK has sent enough food for 275,000 people in Gaza amid warnings of an imminent famine in the war-raged territory. The Foreign Secretary has blamed Israel for blocking supplies, while the Israelis blame the UN for failing to distribute the aid. One side blaming another. It's tit for tat, back and forth it goes. But I mean, the evidence is there to see this aid is being hampered. There's no two ways about it.
Yeah, your question kind of answered itself, really. One side blaming the other, and this has all come in too late. We were warning months ago about famine, and David Cameron kind of, comes in on the popularity vote and says, "Oh, we've got to do something." I think this is a Manchester organisation. It's a non-government organisation, UK Aid. So actually, whether David Cameron can claim to have anything, to be anything to do with it. I don't know, but I believe that the Manchester, that UK aid has managed to get in, or has some of its lorries have managed to get in. But the point is, there are thousands of trucks that have been stuck in Rafah since. I mean, I went to Egypt in early December, last week of November, and already they were two abreast along the road outside, and the Israelis were blocking entry of the trucks. And we were trying to get footage of it then, and we weren't allowed to. And then all of a sudden somebody got footage, and they're three abreast all the way along, about 4 miles along this road. The aid trucks go on and on and on for miles. So it was obvious what was going to happen. This was going to turn into a famine. And we were talking about it in December, and David Cameron wasn't really interested in December. He suddenly jumped on board. Do you know how they could have solved this? There's two ways. One, not vote for a ceasefire or abstain. If a ceasefire is tabled and you vote against it, or you veto it, or you abstain from the vote, that is one way that you are saying we're going to allow this famine to occur. The second way is there's enough trucks in Rafah. If you let them all in, apparently it would take 5 hours to end the famine. So, when you see the simplicity of turning what is famine and disease into something which is no longer a threat, just by opening Rafah and allowing all of that aid through. So then what do? The Americans come up with a ridiculous idea to build an aid port, which is a complete red herring. And an aid port is not necessary. There's a port, I don't know, about 1 kilometre down the road, which would have sufficed. And also, when aid came in from the World Central Kitchen, it all disappeared off down south. So actually, it could have gone in through Rafah's borders. The ridiculousness of this tit for tat. It's not me, it's them. It's the United Nations not allowing it in because we think it'll be taken over by Hamas. I think it was one of the ridiculous statements that the United Nations are now saying that they didn't say. And, it was this minister who'd said it. It's ridiculous. Just let the trucks in. Just drive the trucks in. End of famine. The airdrops, we have to continue. People are saying, is there any need for them anymore? I've sent a message this morning to the Hashemite charity organizations. I know they've had some weather problems. Now, what happens, because the parachutes are not attached with a guided tracking system, one, to stop the Israelis being able to locate where they land and then use them to massacre any that flock towards the pallets. Well, what happens is that then you're up against the wind, and occasionally the prevailing winds have blown the pallets either over the border, or they've blown them into territory where the Palestinians can't have them. So there are some errors, there are some mistakes, but the airdrops have to continue. So I've sent a message to find out what their intentions are. It's a very expensive way of delivering aid, especially when the aid is already in Rafah.
Yeah, it's on the ground. It's on the ground, and it just simply won't be let in. Cameron, actually, just picking up on the point that you made, that there's miles of trucks, 2 to 3 abreast here. Cameron acknowledges, or he gives his figures on it here, which I think he's maybe shedding a brighter light on this than the picture that you're actually painting. So he said before the conflict, around 500 trucks, aid and commercial items, went into Gaza each day. The daily average for the first part of March this month has only been around about 165 trucks a day, and there is fluctuation. He uses the word fluctuation from day to day. So, how are we going to validate the figures that he comes out with, when the reality is, if there's miles of trucks, 2 to 3 abreast, if they were all let in at the same time, it could solve this problem literally overnight, or at least certainly provide a massive relief to the people that are happening overnight. Well, then that would be the case. And again, more rhetoric coming from Cameron. He's eating his 3 square meals, I'm sure, at least a day, heavily subsidised in Westminster. It's okay talking about helping people hungry, but when you're the one starving, believe me, every day counts. That could be the difference between life or death, either for you or for your children. Sarah, we've got to stop now. We're in full flow here, but I've got to stop because we've got to take a break, and then I've got another guest coming on. But I really Really want to appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come on and talk to us this morning. Just directing people your way. If you use the X or Twitter platform, follow Sarah at S Wilkinson BC, and keep up the great work that you're doing. And thank you very much for your time and your input here this morning.